One of the most important things to do with an Excel worksheet is to check your work. Consider the types of calculations that you may be making using a worksheet, and you'll see how important it is that the formulas in it calculate correctly. If you're calculating invoices, salaries, budgets, and so on, you'll want to make sure that the results are correct, because you'll be basing business decisions on them. Unlike practically any other application that you'll be working on in a typical office situation, Excel is the one where accuracy is extremely important, and unfortunately it's too often overlooked. There are a number of ways to check and test your workbook, but the most important thing to do is to realize that there's a strong likelihood that any workbook is going to contain some errors, and to be proactive about working out where those errors are and fixing them. Testing your worksheet with known data is one way of checking things. For example, in this invoice worksheet, it's a little difficult for us to be 100% sure that the costs are being correctly calculated, as they use values that are not easy for us to do the math for in our heads. However, if we were to turn an item cost value into $10, and a quantity into 2, such as we have here, then it's a lot easier for us to know that this value or this calculation is correct, because we know that 10 by 2 is 20. We can take this a step further. I'm going to make this worksheet calculate so that this value is 200. I'll type 7.58 in here and 1 for the quantity. And now this value here is 200, and this allows me to check this calculation that the state and local taxes are being correctly calculated, because it's a calculation I can do in my head, or certainly check with a calculator. And I can also do this addition to check that the addition is working too. When you're stuck with calculations you can't easily check in your head, use a calculator to double check them. If the calculator and Excel agree, you can be relatively sure that the worksheet formulas are working correctly. If not, then you need to investigate what the likely problem is. If we were testing this invoice worksheet in practice, not only would we test it with some known or easily calculated data, but we may also go back and pull some invoices out of our existing invoice system and type these into this worksheet to make sure that there are no problems with the worksheet's design, and that everything is calculating correctly, and there's plenty of room for entering all the data we would ever need to enter. Re-entering existing documents into an invoice like this is another way of testing to make sure that everything is working as expected. In more complex situations, such as the mortgage calculator example that we built in an earlier video, you may recall that I used data that I had located online as a test for the worksheet to make sure that it was working correctly before I went ahead and used it with my own data. If you can't find work calculations for certain formulas within your own business, it may be possible to find worked examples online or in the Microsoft Excel help that you can use to test that your formulas are working correctly. Another way to check data is to perform a rough check. Let's go back to our invoice worksheet here. And for example, in this invoice worksheet, we know that the item line total here should be equal to or more than the item cost. It stands to reason. Even if we don't do any math, this value here has to be of concern because it's less than the item cost. We would need to check this to see what the problem is, and the problem of course is that a value has been entered into the cell. It's no longer a formula. However you do it, you should always approach the task of checking your worksheet with the understanding that it probably does contain mistakes, and your task is to find and fix them.